Christmas Eve has always been my favorite night of the year. Ever since I was a kid, my family would pile into our old farmhouse out in rural Michigan. Me, my parents, my two sisters, and whatever cousins could make the drive. We'd spend the day decorating the tree with the same ornaments we'd had forever, baking cookies, and listening to my dad tell the same corny jokes while he strung up the outdoor lights. By evening, we'd all gather around the fireplace with hot chocolate, and the house would feel so warm and full. Even when the snow was piling up outside, it was the one time everything felt perfect. This particular year was about 15 years ago now. I was 28, living on my own in the city, but I always came back home for the holidays. My parents' house was this big, creaky Victorian they'd bought cheap back in the 80s. 3 stories, a wraparound porch, and an attic that nobody really used except for storage. The place had character, but it also had its quirks. Doors that stuck, floors that groaned, and drafts that seemed to come from nowhere, even with the windows sealed. That Christmas Eve, a bad storm rolled in earlier than expected. Heavy snow, high winds, the kind that knocks out power lines without warning. My sisters couldn't make it. One was stuck at the airport, the other dealing with a sick kid, so it was just me and my parent. We didn't mind. We figured it'd be a quiet night, just the 3 of us, like old times. We had dinner around 7, ham, mashed potatoes, all the usual stuff. Afterward, we sat in the living room with the tree lights glowing and a fire crackling. Mum put on some soft carols, and we talked about nothing important, just catching up. Around 10, the power flickered a couple times but stayed on. Dad joked that we'd better get the candles ready, just in case. I remember laughing and saying we'd be fine. By 11:30, we were all winding down. Mum and Dad headed up to bed, telling me to turn off the lights when I came up. I stayed downstairs a bit longer, scrolling on my phone and finishing the last of the eggnog. The wind was really howling outside, rattling the windows. It was that deep, lonely kind of sound that makes an old house feel even bigger. That's when I first heard it. A soft creak from upstairs, like someone walking across the floorboards in the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps. I figured it was Dad getting a drink of water or something, but then it kept going, back and forth, right above the living room ceiling. I called up quietly, "Dad, everything okay?" No answer, just the steps stopping for a second, then starting again. I wasn't too worried at first. Old houses settle, right? Especially in wind like that. But something about the rhythm felt off. It wasn't random creaking. It was paced, like footsteps trying to be quiet. I turned off the tree lights and headed upstairs. The hallway was dark, but I could see my parents' door was closed, and there was no light under it. I whispered, "Mum? Dad?" Nothing. The steps had stopped as soon as I reached the landing. I went to my old bedroom at the end of the hall, the one I'd had growing up. It felt comforting to be back in it, with my posters still faded on the walls. I got ready for bed, set my phone to charge, and lay there listening to the storm. Sleep didn't come easy. The wind kept whipping against the house, and every so often I'd hear another creak, but I told myself it was nothing. Then, around 1 in the morning, I remember checking my phone. I heard it again, clearer this time. Footsteps, starting from the attic, pull downstairs at the other end of the hall. Slow, heavy ones, coming down the ladder. 1, 2, 3, until they hit the hallway floor. Then walking toward my parents' room. My heart started pounding. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The steps paused outside their door. I thought maybe Dad was sleepwalking or something. He'd done it once as a kid, from what Mom told me. But then I heard a soft knock. 3 quiet taps on their door. No one answered. The knock came again, a little louder. I was frozen. Part of me wanted to get up and check, but something felt wrong. Like if I opened my door, whatever was out there would know I was awake. The knocks stopped. Then the footsteps started toward my room. Slow, dragging almost. They stopped right outside my door. I held my breath. The doorknob turned, slowly, like someone testing if it was locked. It was. Thank God it was. A long pause, then a whisper. Barely audible, but it sounded like an old woman's voice, raspy and sad. "Are you awake?" I didn't move, didn't breathe. My mind raced. Burglar? No. The storm was too bad for anyone to be out. And that voice, it didn't sound threatening. It sounded lonely. The knob rattled once more, then nothing. The footsteps retreated down the hall, back toward the attic stairs. I heard them climb up, one by one, until the attic door creaked shut. I didn't sleep after that. I sat up with the light on, phone in hand, ready to call 911 if anything else happened. But the house went quiet again, except for the wind. Morning came slow. The power had gone out sometime in the night, so it was cold when I finally crept out. Mom and Dad were already up, making coffee on the camp stove. They looked tired, but fine. I asked if they'd heard anything weird. They said no, just the storm. I told them everything. Dad laughed it off at first, said it was the house settling or me dreaming. But Mom got quiet. She went pale, actually. Later that day, after the plows came through and power came back, Mom pulled me aside. She told me something she'd never mentioned before. Back when they bought the house, the realtor had disclosed that the previous owner, an elderly woman, had passed away up in the attic on Christmas Eve, years earlier, alone. Her family was supposed to visit the next day, but the storm had kept them away. They found her days later. Mum said she'd always felt a presence in the house, but nothing bad, just sad, like someone waiting for company that never came. We still had a good Christmas. Quiet, but good. Opened presents, cooked what we could. But that night, before bed, we left a plate of cookies out on the kitchen table, and an extra mug of hot chocolate. Nothing else happened that year, or any year after, really. But every Christmas Eve since, when I'm back home, I make sure the attic door stays closed. And sometimes, if the wind's howling just right, I swear I hear those soft footsteps pause outside the guest room, like she's checking if anyone's there, waiting to be invited in. I've never told many people this. It sounds crazy, I know, but holidays are supposed to be about family, right? Even if some family sticks around a little longer than others. The night before Christmas was always magical in our family growing up in a small town in Vermont. We lived in this cozy 2-story house on the edge of the woods. Nothing fancy, but it had a big stone fireplace where we'd hang our stockings, and Mom would make her famous cinnamon rolls that filled the whole place with that warm, spicy smell. My brother and I would stay up as late as we could, peeking out the windows for Santa, while Dad read us stories from an old book of holiday tale. It was the one night where the world outside felt distant and everything inside was safe and bright. This happened when I was 12, back in the late 90s. My brother was 8, and we were both obsessed with the idea of catching Santa that year. We'd set up little traps, strings with bells across the living room, a plate of cookies dusted with flour to catch footprints. Mum and Dad played along, warning us that Santa wouldn't come if we didn't go to bed. But that night before Christmas, a light snow was falling, and the woods behind our house looked like something out of a postcard. Trees heavy with white, everything quiet except for the occasional hoot of an owl. We had our usual routine, dinner at 6, then opening one present each before bed. I got a new sled, my brother a puzzle. By 9, we were upstairs in our shared room, whispering plans about sneaking down later. The room was at the back of the house, with a window overlooking the woods. We'd crack it open sometimes for fresh air, even in winter, because the heat from the vents made it stuffy. Around 11, after Mom and Dad had gone to bed, we heard them turn off the lights downstairs. We waited maybe half an hour, then tiptoed down in our pajamas, giggling quietly. The tree was lit up with those old multicolored bulbs, casting shadows that danced on the walls. We checked our traps, nothing yet, so we hid behind the couch, planning to wait for Santa. But as we sat there in the dark, the house started to feel different. The snow had picked up outside, muffling everything. Then we heard a faint sound from the backyard, like branches snapping underfoot. We We peeked out the kitchen window, but it was too dark to see much beyond the porch light's glow. My brother whispered that it was probably a deer. We went back to our spot, but a few minutes later, there was a soft thump against the back door, like something bumping it gently. We froze. Then another thump, and a scratching sound, slow and deliberate, like nails dragging down the wood. I wanted to run upstairs and get Dad, but my brother dared me to check it out. Being the older one, I couldn't back down. We crept to the back door, hearts racing. Through the small window in the door, I could just make out a shape in the snow. A dark figure, hunched over, standing maybe 10 feet away in the yard. It looked like a person, but something was off. The way it moved was jerky, like it was struggling against the cold. It turned toward the house, and I swear its eyes reflected the porch light, like animal eyes, glowing yellow. We bolted upstairs, slamming our door and jumping into bed. I pulled the covers over us, whispering that it was just a neighbor or something. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Our neighbors were all elderly and wouldn't be out in a storm like that. We lay there, listening. The house was silent for a while. Then, around midnight, I checked the clock on the nightstand. We heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, uneven steps, like someone limping up one at a time. They stopped at the top of the landing. My brother whimpered and I shushed him. The doorknob rattled softly. Then a voice, low, muffled, like it was coming through a scarf or something. "Let me in, it's cold out here." We didn't move. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Please, I just need to warm up. Santa sent me." That last part made my blood run cold. How did it know we were waiting for Santa? The knob turned slowly, but the door was locked. We always locked it because my brother was afraid of monsters. Scratching started on the door, faint at first, then louder, like claws digging in. I could hear breathing, heavy, ragged, right on the other side. My brother started crying quietly, and I clamped a hand over his mouth. This went on for what felt like forever, maybe 10 minutes. Then the scratching stopped. The footsteps retreated down the stairs, thump by thump. We heard the back door creak open. Wait, had we left it unlocked? No, Dad always checked. Then silence. We didn't sleep. At dawn, we finally crept downstairs. The back door was ajar. Snow drifted in on the kitchen floor. There were footprints, human-sized, but barefoot, leading from the woods to the door and back out. No one had come inside, as far as we could tell. The cookies were untouched. We told Mum and Dad everything. They searched the house and yard, but found nothing. Dad said it was probably a homeless person seeking shelter, and the storm had driven them off. But Mum looked uneasy. She mentioned hearing stories from the old-timers in town about wanderers in the woods during winter storms, people who'd gone missing years ago, frozen to death. But folks swore they saw them on the night before Christmas, begging to come in from the cold. We never saw anything like that again. But that Christmas morning, as we opened presents, I couldn't shake the chill. The woods looked the same, peaceful and white. Years later, I looked it up. Turns out, back in the 50s, a family had vanished in those woods during a blizzard on the night before Christmas. Search parties found nothing but footprints that led nowhere. Now, as an adult, I live in the city, far from those woods. But every night before Christmas, I double-check the locks. And if I hear scratching at the door, I don't answer. Because some things out there, they aren't looking for warmth. They're looking for company, to join them. I've kept this to myself mostly. People would think I'm crazy, but it happened. And sometimes, in quiet moments, I wonder if that voice is still out there, whispering in the snow. That year, when we were all gathered at the family house for the holidays, the night before Christmas felt like the same comforting routine we'd always known. We were staying in a quiet suburb in Ohio, in the split-level home my parents had bought right after they got married. The living room had this big picture window that looked out onto the front lawn, and every year we'd put an electric candle in each window and string lights along the roofline. Inside, we'd have the tree up by early December, and on the night before Christmas, we'd watch old movies like It's a Wonderful Life, while Mom wrapped the last presents. My sister and I would help set out the cookies and milk for Santa, even though I was 14 and secretly knew the truth. But I played along for my little sister, who was 9. This one year stands out. 2008, it was just the 4 of us. No extended family coming over because everyone was sick with the flu going around. We didn't mind. It felt cozy. Snow started falling around dinner time, light at first, then thicker, blanketing everything in that soft hush. After the movie, around 10:30, Mum and Dad sent us to bed. My room was upstairs, next to my sister's. Her room had the window facing the front yard. Mine faced the side. I remember lying there listening to the house set, the faint creak of pipes cooling down, the wind picking up outside. I was almost asleep when I heard my sister call my name softly through the wall. I got up and went into her room. She was sitting up in bed, staring out the window. "What's wrong?" I whispered. She pointed outside. "Look at the snowman." We didn't have a snowman. We hadn't built one that year because the snow was too powdery earlier in the week. But there, in the middle of the front lawn, under the streetlight, was a snowman. 3 uneven balls stacked up with what looked like branches for arms. No scarf, no hat, just rough and lumpy, like someone had thrown it together fast. I figured maybe Dad had gone out after we went to bed, some kind of surprise, but it looked wrong. The head was too small, tilted at an odd angle, and the arms stuck out stiffly, pointing toward the house. We watched for a minute. The snow was still falling pretty hard, but the figure didn't seem to be accumulating much on it, like it had just been made. Then my sister grabbed my arm. "It's moving." I thought she was imagining things, but then I saw it too. The head turned, slowly, jerkily, toward our window, like it was looking up at us. We both ducked down below the sill. My heart was hammering. I peeked again. It was still facing the house, but now one arm had lifted a little, like it was waving or beckoning. I told my sister to stay in bed and ran to get Mum and Dad. They came upstairs, groggy, thinking we were just excited or having a nightmare. Dad looked out the window and went quiet. "That's not ours," he said. Mum pulled us away from the window and closed the curtains. Dad grabbed a flashlight and went downstairs to check the doors. All locked. He peeked out the front window and said the snowman was still there, but not moving now. He didn't want to go outside in the dark to investigate. The snow was deep and it was late. He said we'd look in the morning. We all ended up sleeping in the living room that night. Mum, Dad, my sister on the couch, me on the floor. The Christmas tree lights were still on, glowing softly. I couldn't sleep. Every time the wind gusted, I'd tense up, listening. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it. A soft crunching outside, like footsteps in snow. Slow, circling the house. Crunch, crunch, pause, then closer to the front. I sat up and looked toward the picture window. The curtains were drawn, but there was a small gap at the bottom. Through it, I could see 2 dark shapes on the glass. Handprints, pressed from outside. Child-sized, but too high up for a real kid. Like whatever made them was tall. The prints stayed there for a long time, fogging the glass with breath that wasn't visible. Then they slowly slid down, as if whatever was pressing them was sinking into the snow. After that, nothing. No more sounds. Morning came, grey and cold. Dad went out first with a shovel, just in case. The snowman was gone, completely melted or taken apart. There was just a messy pile of snow where it had been. No footprints leading to or from it, even though the yard was untouched everywhere else. The snow had stopped overnight, so nothing had been covered. We tried to have a normal Christmas. Presents, breakfast, calls to grandparents, but the mood was off. My sister kept looking out the windows, and Mum kept checking the locks. A few days later, when the snow finally melted, Dad found something in the front yard, half buried where the snowman had stood. An old porcelain doll's head. Just the head, cracked and dirty, with painted eyes that stared straight up. We have no idea where it came from. The previous owners didn't have kids, and we'd lived there 10 years without finding anything like it. Dad threw it away, but I still think about it, especially on the night before Christmas, when the snow falls just right. Because sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a glimpse out a window, something standing in the yard, still and silent, watching the house, waiting for us to look back. I've never told anyone outside the family. They'd say kids imagine things, or it was a prank, but we all saw it, and none of us build snowmen anymore. Christmas Eve was the one night my grandparents' house felt truly alive. They lived in this old brick colonial in western Pennsylvania, built in the 1920s, with high ceilings, hardwood floors that echoed every step, and a massive stone fireplace in the dining room where we'd gather after dinner. Every year, the whole extended family would come, uncles, aunts, cousins, and we'd eat until we couldn't move, then sing carols around the baby grand piano that my grandmother played beautifully. The house smelled like pine from the real tree, cinnamon from her baking, and that faint, musty scent old houses have that somehow feels comforting. I was 16 the year this happened, old enough to help with the little kids, but still young enough to get excited about presents. That Christmas Eve, though, a lot of people had cancelled last minute. Stomach bug going around, bad roads farther north, so it ended up being smaller than usual. Me, my parents, my younger cousin Emily, who was 10, my aunt and uncle, and my grandparent, quiet, but still nice. We had dinner around 7, turkey, stuffing, all the sides. Afterward, we moved to the living room for presents. Grandma always insisted we open everything on Christmas Eve, save one for morning. The tree was huge that year, almost touching the ceiling, loaded with lights and those fragile glass ornaments she'd collected for decades. By 10, the adults were sipping wine by the fire, talking low, and Emily had fallen asleep on the couch. I was helping Grandma carry wrapping paper to the trash when she mentioned the upstairs hallway felt colder than usual. She said the heat was acting up again, probably the old radiator. Grandpa just waved it off, said the house was always drafty. I didn't think much of it. My bedroom for the visit was on the 2nd floor, at the end of the long hallway. There were 4 bedrooms up there, but only mine and Emily's were being used that night. Hers was right across from mine. The other 2 had been closed off for years, used mostly for storage. I went to bed around 11:30. The house was quiet, except for the faint voices downstairs and the occasional pop from the fire. I remember scrolling on my phone for a bit. The signal was terrible out there, then turning off the light. The room was dark, but moonlight came through the lace curtains, casting patterns on the wallpaper. I was drifting off when I heard it. Soft singing, a woman's voice, faint and high, coming from down the hall. It sounded like an old lullaby, something like All Through the Night, or one of those Welsh songs my grandmother sometimes. At first I thought it was her. Maybe she'd come up to check on us. But the voice was different, older, thinner, like it was coming through a closed door, and it was coming from one of the unused bedrooms. The one at the very end, the one nobody ever went into. I lay there listening. The singing went on for maybe 5 minutes, soft and repetitive, the same verse over and over. Then it stopped. The hallway floor creaked, slow footsteps passing my door, pausing, then continuing toward the stairs. I figured it was Grandma after all, maybe going down for water. But the steps didn't go down. They stopped, then came back, past my door again, slower this time, and stopped outside Emily's room. I heard her door open quietly. A long pause, then the singing started again. Inside her room now, the same lullaby, but closer, almost whispering. I don't know why I didn't get up right away. I think I was half convinced I was dreaming. But when Emily whimpered, scared, like from a nightmare, I finally sat up. I opened my door and stepped into the hall. It was freezing up there, like the heat wasn't on at all. Emily's door was cracked open, a sliver of moonlight cutting across the floor. I pushed it wider. She was sitting up in bed, blanket pulled to her chin, eyes wide. The room was empty, no one else there. I heard singing, she whispered. It was right by my ear. I told her it was probably Grandma checking on her. We both knew it wasn't. Grandma's voice was deeper, warmer. This had been hollow, like someone trying to remember how to sing. I took Emily to my room, and we left the light on. We didn't sleep much. Every so often, we'd hear the floor creak in the hallway, or a door down the hall open and close softly. Once, clear as anything, the lullaby started again, from the closed bedroom at the end. In the morning, everything seemed normal. Sunlight poured in, the smell of coffee and bacon drifted upstairs. We went down for breakfast, and I pulled Grandma aside while Emily was distracted. I asked if she'd been upstairs singing last night. She looked at me strangely. No, honey, I went to bed right after you. Then she got quiet. She took me into the dining room, away from everyone, and told me something she'd never shared before. When she and Grandpa bought the house in the 60s, the previous owners had lost a daughter, a little girl, about 8 years old, to pneumonia. On Christmas Eve, the mother had sat by her bed in that end bedroom, singing lullabies all night, trying to comfort her as she slipped away. The girl died just before dawn. The family moved out shortly after. Grandma said she'd always felt the house held onto that sadness, especially around the holidays. Nothing harmful, just a mother who couldn't quite leave her child alone on that night. We never heard the singing again after that year, but every Christmas Eve when I visit, I leave the hallway light on, and sometimes, if I wake up in the night, I'll hear the faint creak of footsteps pausing outside the guest room door, like someone checking to make sure the children are safe. I've never told my parents or the rest of the family. They'd think it was just an old house, an imagination. But Emily remembers it too. We don't talk about it, but we both know. Some grief doesn't fade with time. It just waits for the quiet nights to sing again. That special night before Christmas was the highlight of the year for our little family in a small apartment in upstate New York. We didn't have much space, just a 2-bedroom place on the 3rd floor of an old brick building. But Mum made it feel like a winter wonderland. She'd string colorful lights around the windows, set up a tiny artificial tree on the coffee table, and we'd bake sugar cookies shaped like stars and bells. My dad would play his scratchy vinyl records of Bing Crosby and Nat King Cole, and we'd all sing along while wrapping presents. It was simple, but it was ours. The best part was leaving carrots for the reindeer on the fire escape and a note for Santa by the tree. This happened when I was 11, back in the early 2000s. It was just me, Mum, and Dad that year. Grandma was too far away to travel in the snow. We'd had our usual evening, dinner of roast chicken, watching Rudolph on TV, then getting tucked into bed around 10. My room was right off the living room, with a thin wall separating us. The apartment building was old, so you could hear neighbors sometimes, doors closing, muffled voices. But that night before Christmas was always quiet, like everyone was holding their breath for morning. I fell asleep pretty fast, excited about the Game Boy I'd been hinting at. But around 1 a.m, something woke me up, a soft giggling, high-pitched, like a child's coming from the living room. At first, I thought maybe Dad was up eating the cookies and playing a joke, laughing to him. But it didn't sound like him. It was lighter, quicker, multiple voices actually. 2 or 3 little laughs overlapping, like kids whispering secrets and cracking up. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes. The giggles stopped as soon as I moved. Then I heard tiny footsteps, pat, 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 across the hardwood floor, heading toward the tree. Something rustled like paper being shaken. A present. I crept to my door and cracked it open, just enough to peek. The Christmas tree lights were still on, casting that soft, multicolored glow. The plate of cookies was on the coffee table, and the milk glass was half empty. Crumbs everywhere. but no one was there. At least, no one I could see. Then the giggling started again, closer this time, right by the tree. One of the lower ornaments swayed, like a small hand had just flicked it. Another one jingled softly. I whispered, "Dad?" Nothing. Just more quiet laughs, like they were trying not to be heard but couldn't help it. My heart started racing. I wanted to wake Mum and Dad, but their door was closed, and I didn't want to scare them if it was nothing. Instead, I stepped out into the living room, barefoot on the cold floor. The giggles stopped instantly. The room felt crowded somehow, like eyes were on me. That's when I noticed the stockings. We each had one hung on the wall with thumbtacks. Mine, Mum's, Dad's. They'd been empty when we went to bed. Now they were bulging, lumpy shapes inside, like they'd been filled already. But Santa wasn't supposed to come until we were asleep. I tiptoed closer. As I reached for my stocking, a tiny voice whispered right by my ear, "Don't touch. They're ours now." It was a girl's voice, sweet but cold, like wind through a crack. I spun around, no one. Then another whisper from the other side. We waited so long. A boy's voice this time. I backed away, bumping into the coffee table. The milk glass tipped over, spilling across the wood. The giggles erupted, loud and wild, echoing all around the room. Ornaments started shaking on the tree one by one, like invisible hands were playing with them. The presents under the tree rustled, paper crinkling as if being unwrapped and rewrapped. I bolted to my parents' door and banged on it. "Mum! Dad! Wake up!" They stumbled out, sleepy and confused. Dad flipped on the big light. The giggling stopped dead. Everything went still. The tree ornaments hung motionless. The stockings were flat and empty again. The spilled milk was the only thing out of place. I tried to explain, voice shaking. They checked the whole apartment. Doors locked, windows shut tight. Fire escape clear with fresh snow and no footprint. Dad cleaned up the milk and said I must have been sleepwalking and knocked it over myself. Mom tucked me back in, saying it was just a dream from too much excitement. But I know it wasn't, because in the morning, when we opened presents, something was wrong. My main gift, the one from Santa, was a doll. A porcelain doll with curly hair and a red dress. I'd never asked for a doll. I hated them. The tag said, "To Emily," in childish handwriting. That wasn't my name. Mum and Dad looked puzzled. They swore they hadn't bought it. We turned it over, and on the back of the neck, faded but clear, was a date scratched in, 1923, and two tiny initials, EJ. Later that week, Mum talked to the old landlord about the building's history. He got quiet and told her that back in the 1920s, two children, a sister and brother, had lived in our exact apartment with their parents. That night before Christmas, a fire started from the tree lights. The parents got out, but the kids, they didn't. Hidden in the walls, waiting for presents that never got opened. We moved out the next month. I gave the doll to charity, but I still have nightmares about those giggles. Soft, playful, but so lonely. Now every night before Christmas, no matter where I am, I turn off all the lights early. And if I hear laughing in the dark, I pretend to be asleep. Because some kids never stopped believing in Santa, and they really want someone to play with. I've only told my husband this story. He thinks it's creepy but made up. But I know it's real, and I never hang stockings anymore. Christmas Eve was sacred in our family, back in the hills of West Virginia, where I grew up. We had this rambling log cabin my great-grandpa built in the 40s, tucked deep in the hollow, with a tin roof that sang when it rained, and a stone chimney that puffed wood smoke like a beacon. Every year, we'd chop down a pine from our own land, drag it inside, and deck it with handmade ornaments, popcorn strings, tin-foil stars, and little wooden figures Grandpa whittled. The whole place smelled like fresh-cut evergreen, and Grandma's apple cider simmering on the stove. Us kids, me, my 2 brothers, and a gaggle of cousins would run wild outside until dusk, then pile in for stories around the fire. It was the one night the world felt small and safe, no matter how dark the woods got. This happened when I was 11, around 1987. A cold snap had hit hard that week, freezing the creek solid and dusting everything in hoarfrost. The family was all there. Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, the works. About 15 of us crammed in. We'd spent the day sledding the hill behind the house, coming in red-cheeked for hot cocoa. By evening, the adults were in the kitchen laughing over eggnog, while us kids played board games in the den. The cabin had this unfinished cellar underneath, damp, dirt-floored, used for canning jars and old furniture. The trap door to it was in the hallway, latched tight because Grandma said it gave her the chills. Around 9, after we'd sung a few carols, the power dipped, common in storms, but it came back quick. We didn't think much of it. Grandpa started his yearly tale about the Winter Man, an old legend from the mines, a miner who froze in a collapse on Christmas Eve, his spirit wandering the hills looking for warmth. We kids ate it up, giggling nervously. By 10:30, the little ones were nodding off, so the adults herded us to bed. My brothers and I shared the loft upstairs, 3 cots under the eaves, with a small window frosted over. I was the last awake, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the fire pop downstairs. The wind had died down, leaving everything unnaturally quiet, like the hollow was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a faint scraping from below, like something dragging across the floorboards. I figured it was one of the dogs scratching to go out, but we didn't have dogs inside that night. They were in the barn. The scraping stopped, then started again, closer, like it was moving toward the hallway. I sat up, peering over the loft railing. The main room was dim, just embers glowing in the fireplace. Everyone else seemed asleep. Then a thump from the trapdoor, like something pushing up from below. My heart skipped. I nudged my older brother, whispering, "You hear that?" He grumbled and rolled over. The thump came again, harder. The latch rattled. I crept to the edge of the loft, looking down. The trapdoor bulged slightly, like pressure from underneath. Then it settled, silence. I almost convinced myself it was the house shifting in the cold. But as I lay back down, the scraping resumed. Now inside the house, slow and deliberate, like footsteps on the dirt below filtering up. Then a voice, muffled, deep, like gravel in a throat. "Let me up. It's cold down here." I froze solid. The voice came again. "Family's here. Let me join." My little brother whimpered in his sleep. I shook my older brother hard this time. He woke grumpy, but when he heard the next thump, his eyes went wide. We both listened as the trapdoor rattled violently, the latch straining. Downstairs, someone stirred. Uncle Ray, I think, snoring on the couch, but the voice kept murmuring. Names, our names. "Tommy, Billy, come open up." We didn't move. The rattling built to a frenzy, wood creaking like it might splinter. Then, abrupt stop. Footsteps, fading back down into the cellar. A long sigh, like wind through a crack. We didn't sleep. At first light, we told the adults. Grandpa went pale as ash. He grabbed a lantern and pried open the trapdoor. Dad and Uncle Ray behind him with shotguns, just in case. The cellar was empty as always. Jars on shelves, old trunks, dirt floor packed hard. But in the center, clawed into the earth, was a rough outline, like a man had lain there and scattered around it. Coal dust, black and fresh, like from the old mine shafts that honeycombed the hills. Grandpa nailed the trapdoor shut that day, added extra latches. He didn't tell stories anymore after that. But later, over whiskey with the men, I overheard him say the cabin was built over an old mine entrance, sealed up after a cave-in back in the 30s. On Christmas Eve, 5 miners trapped, froze to death calling for help. Folks said one survived long enough to scratch at the boards above, begging to be let up. We had Christmas as usual. Presents under the tree, big breakfast, forced cheer, but the cabin felt different after, colder in spots. Grandpa passed a few years later, and the family sold the place. I drive by sometimes, see it standing empty, and on Christmas Eve, if I'm alone, I swear I hear that gravel voice in the back of my mind, whispering to let him in. From one family member to another, I've buried this story for years. Too raw, too close, but it's true as the frost on those windows. And sometimes, in the quiet, I wonder if he's still down there, waiting for the latch to lift